So now I have shown that logic is not contingent upon your God, you would probably go and ask me how I know my reasoning is valid in the first place, right? Well, we're getting to that. First, let's talk about your foundation. How do you get out of this absolute global skepticism that you claim is the inevitable result of any non-Christian worldview? Sai would probably say, our foundation is that we start with God. In order to know anything, you either have to know everything or have revelation from someone who knows everything. In other words, we can have knowledge and certainty because God provides us with certainty. My response: that of course assumes that God is capable of providing such certainty. Sai would probably say, are you saying that he couldn't reveal things in such a way that we can know them for certain? If you are intellectually honest, you should admit that it would be possible for an all-knowing and all-powerful being to reveal things with absolute certainty. My response: I see no reason to believe that that's possible. If you claim that God can do such a thing, then it's your job to show that God is capable of such an act. Sai would then probably respond in the following way: how could you possibly know that an all-powerful and all-knowing God cannot reveal things with certainty? I don't need to prove that, because as long as you cannot prove that it would be impossible, it would be intellectually dishonest to not allow for the possibility that he could. My response: I actually already sort of addressed that in part 1, but let me give some reasons why I reject the whole notion of God revealing things in such a way that we can know them for certain. I will first name 3 objections and then I will explain them in more detail. 1. All-powerful and all-knowing are meaningless terms. 2. Even if God can provide you with certainty, you demonstrably have every reason to doubt that he actually did that. And 3. The concept of being absolutely certain of non-self-attesting truths is unintelligible. I have already made a video on the attribute of omnipotence being meaningless, and the link is in the description box. I don't have one about omniscience yet, so I won't say that much about it. But when it comes to your God being all-powerful, that tells me nothing, nor does it tell you anything. After all, it doesn't mean that God can do absolutely everything, even logically impossible things, right? Sai would then probably respond: no, of course not. I said that in my debate at UNCG Greensboro. God can only do things that are logically possible. God has to be consistent with his own nature. My response: yes, God needs to be consistent with his own nature. In other words, God can only do things that doesn't violate any of his attributes, right? So let me ask you a question. Do you know all of God's attributes? Do we have a complete understanding of his nature? Sai would probably say, no, of course not. We can only know what God revealed about himself. We don't have a perfect understanding of his entire nature. My response: if God can only do things that his nature allows him to do, then how can we know what God can and cannot do without understanding his nature? If we don't know all of God's attributes, then we don't know if action X is compatible with God's nature or violates some unknown divine attribute. In other words, if you can claim that it's possible that God can reveal things with certainty, then I can simply claim that it's possible that revealing things with certainty violates God's nature. And you would have to agree that you don't have a full understanding of God's nature, and therefore you should consider the possibility that such an action could violate an unknown divine attribute. To which Sai would probably say, no, you're wrong, because God has revealed to me with certainty that God can reveal things with certainty. So I know that God is capable of doing this. I might not have a full understanding of God's nature, but I do know what God has revealed about himself. So I may not know everything that God is capable of, and everything he is incapable of, but I do know some of the actions he can perform, and some of the actions he cannot perform. My response: well, let's put that to the test. I've already asked you in the comments section before whether you would be capable of making a hypothetical list with all the certain facts that God supposedly provided you with, but you said that you cannot make such a list. Sai responded to that: that doesn't matter, I cannot make a list of all the cells in my body either. That doesn't mean that I don't have cells in my body, or that I don't know that I have cells in my body. My response: I agree that you can have absolute certainty without being aware that you have it. After all, everyone knows with absolute certainty that they exist, but most people aren't even aware that they have that certainty in the sense of it actively being on their minds or their ability to express it. However, there's a crucial aspect to this that you are missing. Namely the following: the certainties that I am talking about are self-attesting truths. things that are true due to the impossibility of the contrary, things that prove themselves. You are not talking about self-attesting truths. After all, you claim that God needs to reveal them. If God didn't reveal them, you wouldn't know them for certain. In other words, those facts that you supposedly receive from God are non-self-attesting truths. Sai would then probably say, so what? If God can reveal them with certainty, I would still know them for certain, so why does that even matter? My response, because of the following. Even if you have divine certainties, you also have beliefs. So unless God also revealed with certainty what you know with certainty, it is very much possible to believe that you know X with divine certainty, even though X is not among the things that God actually revealed with divine certainty. And this includes the belief that God can reveal things with certainty and that God has revealed things with certainty. In other words, it is possible that you merely are convinced that God has revealed things to you with absolute certainty, when in fact He didn't. After all, God hasn't revealed to you what you know with certainty. But what really puts the nail in the coffin of this divine certainty concept is that it's not self-attesting. My list of certainties may very well be incomplete, but the things that are on that list are self-attesting and therefore cannot be mere beliefs. I know them precisely because they don't depend on another being telling me that I can know them, but because they are true due to the impossibility of the contrary. They would even need to be true to be false. They prove themselves. You don't know if God can reveal things with certainty. You don't know if God has revealed things with certainty, and actually you have every reason to doubt that, since God wasn't smart enough to provide you with a list of those certain facts. And you cannot distinguish between actual certainties and merely perceived certainties to begin with. At least, not with certainty. And that's the problem with arbitrarily throwing around this whole notion of being absolutely certain. The only things we can know with absolute certainty are self-attesting truths. If X is not self-attesting, we could be wrong about X. After all, a self-attesting truth is in the end simply a descriptive label of something that can be known with absolute certainty. Saying that you know something that is non-self-attesting with absolute certainty is like saying, I know something that I cannot know with absolute certainty. It's self-contradicting. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why I reject the concept of omniscience, but that's a topic for another video. But not only are omnipotence and omniscience meaningless attributes, all goodness is a meaningless attribute as well. After all, if I asked you how you can know whether God is even trustworthy when revealing things, you would probably appeal to His all goodness. But you cannot appeal to your supposed divine certainty as support for that claim, because if God isn't all good, then He can lie to you. Furthermore, goodness in your worldview is just another label for God's nature to begin with. God is the standard of what is good. So saying God is all good is nothing more than saying that God is God. It's nothing more than a tautology. God is good, good is God. So if lying isn't against God's nature to begin with, you can't even say that it is evil. There would be no conflict in saying that God is all good and that God can lie. You claim that all foundations are circular. It only depends on whether it's a virtuous circle instead of a vicious circle. Well, your position is as viciously circular as you can get. Your foundation is that a largely unknown and perhaps unknowable being provides you with non-self-attesting certainties that are unknown in both amount and exact content, of which it is unknown whether he is capable of revealing such facts and unknown whether he actually did or not. And it's also unknowable whether this being could and or did deceive you. That's not a virtuous circle, Sai. Sai would then probably say, it doesn't matter, you are still relying on your own reasoning. How do you know that your reasoning is valid in the first place? And if you don't know that, then you are in no position to make any argument at all. My response? We'll talk about that in the next part. There I will show you an epistemological foundation that is definitely virtuous.